A few years ago, I asked the 20,000+ people in my email course on patellar tendonitis what they were struggling with, and one thing stood out like a dislocated kneecap. By far, one of the biggest fears among people with patellar tendonitis is that they will never get better. So the first question we'll attack in this video is, can I still get better even if I've had patellar tendonitis for years? And because these issues are related, we'll also cover another question that Vikmar sent in last week. His question is, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm about 4 weeks into my knee tendonitis. When can I expect to return to the gym and what does the timeline look like? The frustrating part about patellar tendonitis is that unless you do the right things at the right time, it will not get better and it may even get worse. That's why some people have been struggling with it for years. So we'll start our little tendonitis timeline by looking at how it happens, because that helps us understand how to reverse it, and then we'll talk about whether a tendon can still get better years later. Tendonitis happens when you overload a tendon repeatedly and interrupt its adaptation attempts in the process. The initial overload can be anything from participating in a weekend tournament, progressing your strength workouts too quickly like I did many years ago, increasing your weekly playing time in your sport too quickly, or just training too often, among other things. For example, one recent study on volleyball players found that athletes with more than 20 hours of weekly training volume had an odds ratio of 8.94 for developing patellar tendonitis, so their risk was 9 times as high. And in terms of weekly training frequency, risk shoots up dramatically if you do hard training 3 or more times per week. The harder you train, the likelier overload becomes, and the more often you train, the likelier you are to interrupt the tendon's adaptation attempts. The magic threshold for that seems to be twice per week. Now, regardless of what exactly caused the overload, your knee now feels just a little bit different. You can tell it's not completely normal anymore, and deep down, your tendon is trying to tell you, dude, take a break. But because most of us don't speak tendon, we never get the message. So what most of us do is we keep training, we keep interrupting the tendon's adaptation attempts, and the knee just continues to feel a little bit off, but it's nothing serious. And as time goes by, the pain will get worse, and depending on your individual pain tolerance and how important sports are to you, it could take months until you finally decide that you need to do something about it. If you could take a look into the tendon at that point, chances are you'd see the collagen inside the tendon is no longer well aligned but disorganized, and you'd also see more cells, larger cells, and maybe even some dead cells. The big question is, can you still get better if this has been going on for years? And you may not like what I have to say, but let's rip the band-aid off. One thing I learned in Dr. Peter Malira's fantastic tendinopathy seminar in London a few years ago was that in reaction to the load you place on the tendon, there will be a cellular response with a positive or negative outcome. The positive outcome can be homeostasis, so nothing happens, or adaptation, meaning the tendon gets stronger. The negative outcome is pathology, all the bad stuff we spoke about earlier. But here's the catch. A healthy tendon can tolerate high loads, but the further tendonitis progresses, the lower the loads the very same tendon can tolerate becomes, so the tendon gets weaker. If tendonitis has been going on for years, load tolerance will have decreased even further, which makes it easier to cause pain by accidentally overloading the tendon. But given the right load at the right training frequency, a positive tendon adaptation is still possible. So even if you've had it for years, you can still get better, and that's one of the few positive aspects of tendonitis. It's never too late. Never. Here's how our tendonitis timeline continues. Once you do decide to start rehab, how long does it take? During rehab, you will go through the following 5 stages. Stage 1 is getting out of the irritable pain state, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. Stage 2 is building up a tendon's load tolerance, for which you're going to use slow tendon strengthening exercises. Stage 3 is working on biomechanical issues that contribute to patellar tendon overload. In stage 4, you'll reintroduce explosive movements once your tendon is strong enough. And finally, stage 5 is transitioning back into sports. The problem with giving recovery estimates or timeframes for these stages is that progression always takes place at an individual pace, but as a rule of thumb, the longer you've had the injury, the longer your recovery will be. So if you've had tendonitis for a year, you should plan to spend at least 3 to 6 months on rehab. And as much as it sucks, quitting rehab too soon is one of the major reasons why tendonitis keeps getting worse, because if you get back into sports before your tendon is strong enough, your pain will return. Now, regardless of whether you've had tendonitis for years or not quite as long, here are the first 3 steps you should take if you wanted to get better. Your first order of business is getting into the constant pain state. So you need lower pain levels that are stable. To do this, avoid all activities that cause tendon irritation like running, or jumping until pain has stabilized. After that, step 2 is finding a tendon strengthening exercise that works for you and doing it 2 or 3 times per week. You could do slow squats, for example, but you could also do slow leg presses. Scale the resistance up slowly. Keep in mind that it may take you a few weeks of experimentation to find what works for you. Don't give up. Physical training is the only treatment approach supported by strong evidence in research. Step 3 is working on the biomechanics, for example by fixing tightness in your calves, hamstrings, or quadriceps muscles. Like we talked about last week, these put you at higher risk of tendon overload. Then you stick with your rehab for at least 3 months. This is a lengthy process even if you're doing everything correctly. So to recap what we talked about in this video, yes, you can definitely still get better even if you've had tendonitis for years. Number 2, during rehab, you will go through 5 stages and jump ahead at your own risk. And number 3, to get started, do a tendon strengthening exercise, work on biomechanics, and keep doing that for at least 3 months. It's not fun and it's not easy, but the cold hard truth is, if you don't do it, it won't get done, and the best time to start is now. I really wish there was some magic bullet I could share to help you skip all of this, but as of 2019, there isn't, so I'll just try to help in all other possible ways. 2 more things you can do if you have some energy left is subscribe to my YouTube channel and then head on over to fixedkneepain.com/tendonitis if you want to learn more about how you can make your knees strong again. That's it for today, and this time I will see you in 2 weeks.